Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Liam's Hockey. Right back at it here for you on April the 6th. I don't even know what day it is. Is it Monday? I don't know, man. It's hard to keep track. I think it is. It's hard to keep track. You kind of lose track of what's going on with the craziness, but keep on chugging, right everybody? Stay safe. Keep on chugging and we'll get back in the real world soon enough. That was Peter Oliver. You just heard coughing. As he makes us another fantastic supper. I'm going to wolf down a couple chicken burgers here in no time flat. So, on the show tonight, well, Johnny Bower, on this day in 1969, played his second last game ever, his last playoff game ever. This will make Ollie happen. It was in a loss to the Boston Bruins, as they lost 4 straight to the Bruins. And we talked a little bit about the series earlier. It included that great, well, if you're into that sort of stuff, that fantastic or infamous brawl in Game 1 involving Forby Kennedy and half the Bruin roster and half the fan base in Boston, it seemed like, which was the final NHL game Forby ever played. But anyway, on this day in 1969, Johnny Bower played his final ever playoff game as the oldest goaltender to play a playoff game. 44 years, 9 months, and 28 days on this day in 69. Now, I like to give you some more of the story, so we'll start with this. Johnny Bower is not his real name, as most of you probably know. His real name was Johnny Kizkan. It was Ukrainian, and he was born in 1924. And the story goes, and there's a number of them. And even though I met Johnny many times, and I worked with him many times, and I had him on the air many times, I only asked him once, publicly, never privately, to explain it, and it was a very vague answer. I think he was mostly being just polite and didn't really allude to any specific reason as to why he changed the name. The speculation goes that he didn't want to carry a name that was more linked to East Bloc, post-Second World War. Allegedly, the sports writers had a hard time spelling it correctly, writing it correctly. There may be some merit to that. That did happen in the 1940s in the NHL. There was probably maybe any number of reasons, but for whatever reason, including him saying it was his mother's maiden name, which I don't know if that was ever verified or not. But here's what I want to tell you. About 6 or 7 years ago, God rest his soul, he's no longer with us, as you know. Johnny's still alive, and I do a gig at the Hockey Hall of Fame. And I'm with Wendell Clark, Johnny Bower, Paul Henderson, and I think maybe even Tom Fergus may have been part of that group as well. And I'm telling the story about Johnny and his NHL career and how he came out of the Cleveland organization, New York Rangers, gets beat out by Gump Worsley, whatever. Anyway, after the event, we're upstairs and we're having a pop. And keep in mind, we're in a private function at the Hockey Hall of Fame. And Johnny says to me, Liam, you want to see something really cool? And he said, you're a guy I think that would appreciate this. I said, absolutely, Johnny. He says, have you been to the Montreal Canadian replica dressing room in the hall? I said, absolutely. Yeah, of course I have, many times. And he said, do you know where Jacques Plante's pads are in the room? And I said, yep, they're beside Ken Dryden's over on the one corner. I know exactly as you walk in where they are. He says, well, let's go down there because I'm going to tell you something right now. Those are not Jacques' pads. They're mine. I said, what? He said, yeah, they're my pads. And I can tell. I'm going to show it to you. I said, okay, let's go. We had the run of the place. Like the place was empty. And Johnny and I went down and we go into the Montreal Canadian dressing room. He says, pick up the right pad. I picked up the right pad and he said, look under the bottom strap. Look for 2 initials. Tell me what they are. And I looked. And it was faded, but it looked like JB. It did. It looked like JB to me. I said, Jesus. Oh, no, it wasn't Jesus. It was Johnny. Johnny Bower. And he said, they're my pads. And he said, I'll tell you why. Johnny, when Jacques Plante came to the Toronto Maple Leafs in the early 70s, I was still being involved with the Leafs as a practice goalie sometimes. When one of the other goaltenders wasn't ready, I would put the pads on and I would go out. And I came in one time after practice and Jacques says, geez, you were kicking out everything today. You looked like you were back in the 60s, winning the cups in 62 and 63, 64 and whatnot. He says, man, those pads, let me try those. And he put them on and says, geez, Johnny, they feel good. Can I keep them? And he said, go ahead. I don't need them. I got a bunch of other pairs here I can use for practice. And he says that Jacques took the pads at that time, and they were his pads, and they stayed his pads. And when Jacques retired and they did the Hab thing and they needed a set of pads, that those are the pads that they got, according to Johnny on that day. I don't know if it's 100% true or not, but isn't that a fantastic story? And he played his final playoff game ever on this day in 1969. So I think that's pretty cool. Two more for you here, and then a very special toast to finish off. 1975, the Chicago Blackhawks. A little Chicago history for you here. It won't go too deep, but on this day in 1975, the Chicago Blackhawks won their 1,200th game in history, beating the Minnesota North Stars 3-0. I think Ivan Boldarev scored. I think he got the winner, actually. Cliff Correll may have got one. Anyway, Billy Reay was coaching the Chicago Blackhawks, and he got his 500th career win, the same night that Chicago got their franchise 1,200th career win. And Tony Esposito got the shutout for the Chicago Blackhawks, and it gave him, at that time, 52 career shutouts, one more than Glenn Hall, who held the previous record as a member of the Chicago Blackhawks. And my sidebar story on this one involves Billy Reay. And I could go into depth on Chicago, and I will at one of our podcasts, Sticks and Taps, down the road. Not the one this week, but maybe the one next week, because I love the story of how they got their name. I love the story of Major Fred McLaughlin in the First World War being part of the 333rd Machine Gun Artillery, part of the 86th Infantry in the First World War, and their division was named the Blackhawks. I'll get into that another time. Now here's something for you. This has somewhat been confirmed over time. But you got to remember, when hockey started, there was no natural celebration when goals were scored to put your hands up, to put your stick up. There was nothing really along those lines. And of course, the hockey was decimated, as the entire world was, by the First World War. Came out of that what's known as the Roaring 20s. Got into the Depression of the 20s, the 30s, came out of the Spanish influenza epidemic right at the end of ironically, as we've talked about right now, with what we're going through right now as a global pandemic. Got into the 1940s, the Second World War, 1939 to 1945, came out of that, starts to thrive again, and as the world was coming up for air at that time, post-Second World War, one of the things that they wanted the hockey players to do was show a little bit more emotion on the ice. So after some deliberation, as the 1947-48 season started, and this is now 2 seasons post-Second World War, Frank Patrick, one of the greatest innovators in hockey history, brother of Lester, Hall of Famer, former coach and manager and player and league president, did it all. Not NHL, but in the PCHA, PCHL. And the story goes that in a game against the Montreal Canadiens in 1947, in fact, they even pinpoint the date, and I believe it's November the 13th, that Frank Patrick went to the Canadiens and went to the Bruins that night, that he was the team he was helping run, and said, guys, when you score tonight, whoever scores tonight, put your hands up and put the stick up in celebration, and show some emotion. Get the fans going, get the fans involved. And the first guy to do it, allegedly, the story goes, was Billy Reay in 1947. He's a player for the Montreal Canadiens, as some of you probably didn't know. He was a very solid hockey player before he got into coaching, and his first coaching job in the NHL was with the Toronto Maple Leafs. He was actually fired by Punch Imlach, and then ended up in Chicago after and did a hell of a job, but never won a Stanley Cup as a coach, but got to the finals a couple times in 71 and 73. 65. I don't know if he was there in 65 or not. It might have been Rudy Pillis, but he was the first guy as a player that was told by Frank Patrick, and he got his 500th career win on this day in 1975. I think that's a pretty neat story. Last one for you here. On this day in 1999, Vinny Damphousse played his 1,000th game in NHL history. San Jose beat Phoenix 1-0. Statistics, just statistics. However, our sidebar story to finish up here is going to be on Vinny Damphousse. And this is a great one, and it's one that's become fairly well known over time. He's the only player in NHL history to lead 3 teams in scoring in 3 successive years. And they were 3 Canadian teams. The Toronto Maple Leafs in 1991, the Edmonton Oilers in 1992, and the Montreal Canadiens in 1993. He had 73 points, 89 points, and 97 points, respectively. I'm going to see if I can remember that trade. So he leads Toronto in scoring. He was drafted by the Leafs, I believe 6th overall. Has a fairly solid run with them. They've got Wendell there. They're doing some things. But Gary Leeman has a 50-goal season. Vinny is second in points to Gary. And they decide to trade him in a 7-player deal with the Edmonton Oilers, picking up Craig Berube, Glenn Anderson, and Grant Fuhr. And they send out Vinny, Luke Richardson, Peter Ing, and I can't remember the fourth guy right now, but I believe it was 7-player deal. He leads Edmonton in scoring with 89 points. They're a year removed, now 2 seasons after the end of that season, removed from winning the Stanley Cup. He leads a team in scoring with 89 points. They ship him out. They ship him to Montreal for Shane Corson, Brent Gilchrist, and Vladimir Vucek. If I remember Vladimir. You remember him? Anyway, he goes to Montreal and leads them in scoring with 97 points. In fact, he led them in scoring 2 or 3 out of the next few years. Mark Recchi was right there as well. The Habs were starting to slide, and even more so after the Patrick Roy trade. And then Vinny ends up going to San Jose, where he finished second in scoring there for a couple of seasons, including, I believe, the season where he played his 1,000th game on this date to bring it all back around. So there you go, a little Vinny stuff to finish up. And I'm going to shut her down here tonight and do a very special toast. Tonight, as many of you, and I've seen this on social media, and I'm pretty happy about it to have seen it, that and we won't remember this for a long time, obviously, folks. You may notice something a little different in my background shot here tonight. Right over my right shoulder is a game-used stick by my favorite player of all time, Yvon Cornway. And the stick is there tonight, as most in the hockey world 2 years ago, or shortly after 2 years ago on this date, were putting hockey sticks out in some way, shape, or form in a public place to honor the victims of the Humboldt bus crash, which was 2 years ago tonight. For the lives that were turned upside down and those that we lost, tonight we're toasting them and everybody that was affected. So if you got a stick tonight in this crazy pandemic global world we're living in right now, throw it out front of the house, throw it by your door, and remember Humboldt tonight. G'day.